Hey YouTube, welcome back. I've got another build here for you. This is something that I would call super, maybe generic, or maybe mainstream, maybe meta. So as a result of the Bladedancer weekend, the 3 skills for the weekend were Lethal Mirage, Shurikens, and Puncture. So we chose to use Shurikens in our build, and we kind of cheesed it up because Shurikens weren't our main source of damage. We were only using them for armor with a blade shield and proc them off of shift. So what I did this weekend is I had a second attempt at playing a Umbral Blades Shadow Dagger build. The last time that I played this build for one of the weekend tournaments, I actually died before I got to do my push in the arena. I died trying to get a Bastion of Honor for my character. So this time around, I wanted to roughly play the same character and see how far I could push in the arena. Because my impression of this character is that it's really, really good in arena because you just get to shift Shadow Cascade, shift Umbral Blades, and shift and keep running away from the monsters for hundreds and hundreds of waves. So I had high expectations for how this build was going to do, but I actually died learning something just shy of 300 waves. So you can take a look at my last Epoch shorts that I have here on YouTube if you'd like to, but the TLDR is I have a bunch of less damage taken while moving, but every time you click Synchronized Strike, there is like a quarter of a second where your character does not count as moving. So I did that and died because all of my damage reduction turned off. So that said, this character, we have about 2,000 life with our Wings of Argentus on. We could get much more life, but I think with proper play, the character that I'm showing you today is super, super tanky. I will say that the way that I built it, I've pretty much taken out all semblance of single target damage. The single target damage is fine. You can kill a Robus, up to 150 corruption, which is what I was doing on my character during the weekend race, very, very easily. And you have a tremendous amount of mobility. When I was trying to fight bosses, I would just take off my Wings of Argentus because I was also standing still, and I would just put on a normal chest piece with some kind of exalted Shadow Dagger effect prefix on it to get some extra life and damage out of the build so that I can just kill bosses and get over with it faster. So what this character does, hopefully you've seen something like this before, but maybe like a bit more streamlined in our case because we really don't have any single target damage. So anything that says shadows deal increased damage, we're not going to worry about that. Our entire playstyle is Synchronized Strike and Shift, and that's the extent of it. We're just going to keep running around like this every single time. Our Synchronized Strike itself, when we leap into the air like that, when it hits enemies, it applies all of our on-hit effects, and it also applies 1 Shadow Dagger. When we shift, we'll leave behind a shadow here, and then these 2 shadows will also create our Umbral Blades. And then Umbral Blades, we don't have any kind of explosion or anything like that. We just want them to exist for as long as possible, applying Shadow Daggers on hit. So before we talk about the mastery, the skills, and the gear and whatnot, let's talk about Shadow Daggers themselves. They're kind of an outlier when it comes to ailments and how much damage they deal. Basically, they deal way too much damage. And with the introduction of Umbral Blades into the game, they're pretty accessible. So Shadow Daggers, in the past, they were kind of busted, and then they got nerfed, not in terms of damage, but in terms of application rate and playstyle. And then once Umbral Blades got reintroduced to the game, all of these Shadow Dagger builds once again came to the forefront of just being incredibly strong for very, very low investment. So how do Shadow Daggers work? It's an ailment that you place on an enemy. Once the enemy has 4 Shadow Daggers on them, those pop, and they will deal the Shadow Dagger skill damage to them. So Shadow Daggers is not something we can spec into. We can't click on the Shadow Dagger tree and click on all the more damage multipliers. But the base damage is incredibly high, and because it's an ailment, anything that says Shadow Dagger effect, we can get on our helmet prefix and our body armor prefix, and for us, even on idols too, gives us access to a more multiplier. So it gives us a ton of damage. So here is the information on Tunk Lab's website about the Shadow Dagger ailment itself, but for the skill that it procs, let's take a look at lastepochtools.com. So if you to get an idea of how strong Shadow Daggers are, they scale with the flat damage of your weapon itself. So for me, this is 9 plus 42. You could even use a bigger weapon if you wanted to use this. They scale with throwing damage. So something that says plus 12 throwing attack damage, plus 15 throwing attack damage. Both of those apply to it as well. It scales off of melee % increased damage, throwing percent increased damage, percent increased physical damage because the majority of your damage is physical, and then you'll have some fire damage if you're using affixes like on this ring here. So we have access to a lot of flat damage, even in our mastery itself, and then Shadow Daggers have a 450% added damage scaling. So anytime you put in 1 damage, it's as if you put in 4.5 damage. These also always crit, so we don't need any kind of critical strike chance, and we can scale critical strike multiplier as much as possible on every piece of gear where it's available to us. So that's kind of why Shadow Daggers are so strong, and we are relying on them completely for all of our damage. Before we talk about the mastery, the skills, and the gear, I will say that this is one of the fastest types of characters I've ever played. So things like this, and things like maybe Cold Dot Werebear, when you're just rampaging through an entire map and using Entangling Roots, these kind of builds are just like incredibly fast. They have more than enough damage to clear everything in the game, and they just like farm super, super hard. The fact that while we're running around, we're going to have like, it says 97 up here, but we're going to gain haste upon hitting things and killing stuff as well. We're going to be running around with like maybe 117, 120 movement speed at any given point in time. And it's just like, it's so easy to just be mobile, never stop moving, always be killing enemies behind it as well. Like we have tons of damage. We have glancing blows. We have dodge, block. We have less damage taken while moving from our chest piece. And we also have less damage taken moving from our mastery. So if we're playing right and moving all the time, we have tons and tons of survivability. Now, like I said at the beginning, sometimes when you use Sync Strike, you count as not moving. So at the very beginning here, whoop, right there, you count as not moving. So for just a moment, you lose the damage reduction from your Wings of Argentus, and you also lose the damage reduction from the evasion node in your base mastery. So I didn't know that going into this weekend, but hopefully you will know that if you play this character. So just keep that in the back of your mind. So here's the mastery. Remember, any one flat damage that we get into our build, whether it's throwing or whether it's melee, gives us 450% effectiveness of added damage. So we're going to grab all of these nodes here, even though we don't really use the added, or even though we don't really use the attack speed. So we have 8-8 and then 1-5-5 for some haste on hit, and then we have as much glancing blows as we can get. We're using a shield, we're not stopping to hit anything, so we're not going to be capped on glancing blows, but we do have about 30% glancing blow chance. We also have, 31% glancing blows, which sometimes go up when enemies hit us. We have our 47% block chance from our double tier 5 shield. And then we have 25% dodge chance, but anytime that we shift, it goes up to 76 for 1 second. And then our shift is on a 2.2 second cooldown. So we are mostly dodge capped, or invulnerable, or repositioning, or gaining life off of shadow creations, and we're just a very, very mobile character. I kind of call this character like Riven from League of Legends. If that kind of thing appeals to you, you're probably going to like this as well. Back to our base class, we have 0 points in Marksman. Nothing over here is appealing to us. The most appealing thing would be like maybe some crit vulnerability or some critical strike avoidance, but we don't need any points here. If you're going to go the route of using Morning Frost, the unique pair of boots, along with this build, which is a super high damage version of this build, high investment as well if you're also trying to cover your resistances, you'd come in here and you grab these 1 point of dexterity as well. But because I'm not using Morning Frost, we didn't find any, and also I didn't have a way to cover my resistances by taking the cold and fizz penalties. So I wouldn't have used them even if I had them, not in hardcore. So for Bladedancer, we have as much glancing blow as possible, then some health and chance to gain glancing blows when hit. We have some points in melee and throwing attack damage. Remember that because Shadow Daggers is kind of a weird skill, it's like a sub-skill that's getting procced, it counts as both melee damage and attack damage. So this is a very, very strong node for us here. We're going to put all 8 points. We also have melee physical damage and throwing physical damage. Remember, once again, both of these apply to our character because Shadow Daggers are kind of strange like that. So this is 4, is that it? This is 4 flat damage per point for our skill. We've spec'd 6 points into Skya Synthesis, I think is how you pronounce this thing. And we're really just using this for the health gain on shadow creation. It's a great way of keeping ourselves topped off. We do have Leech in this character, so I'll show you that in just a moment. But this is just a nice way to have a bunch of extra health in the character. it feels good. I'm happy to have all 6 points in here, honestly. Apostasy is worth talking about. So we could take our dodge chance, which is 25, and then sometimes it's 76, and we could have that at a 200% rate, convert it into glancing blows. So my glancing blow chance right now is 31, and then we have 25 dodge, so 50, 30, 80. We could be at 80% chance to receive a glancing blow just by standing around like this. The reason that I chose not to convert it is I like having 2 distinct forms of damage mitigation, or damage, maybe like EHP multipliers, whatever you want to call them, because, I don't know, you don't really mitigate damage by dodging, do you? So I like having 2 different forms of defense here. I want my dodge to roll separately, and then also my glancing blows to roll separately. So Shadow Daggers do count as melee damage, so we don't have any like melee attacks to take advantage of melee damage Lisa's life, but every time that a Shadow Dagger procs, it is a proc of melee damage, so Blood Dance is a good source of leech for us. So we put all 5 points in here. Next up is 6, maybe 6, 1, 5, 5. I had some extra points while I was leveling, so I put another one here while I was doing Arena for my final push. But I like all these points because they're very reliable for us, right? So the first point is just dodge rating and damage or full health, which are very reliable. It's a very reliable condition for our character to meet. And then on the very right side here, we have damage or full health and then stacks of perfection gained per melee attack. So these perfection stacks, normally, if you get hit, you lose all stacks, and then you have to like use a melee attack and get those stacks back. But as long as we have at least 1 point here into Exuberance, these are pretty much permanent buffs. You're always going to be at full life. You're always going to have hit at least 1 enemy recently. And we are a very nimble character, and we can apply our basic attacks just by hitting something with Synchronized Strike very reasonably. It's like, just tag a monster once and we'll be running away from it. And we do want to hit something with Synchronized Strike because it applies Armor Shred and also applies 1 stack of Shadow Daggers for us. So next up, we have 1 point in Silver Shroud. We don't care about the ward itself, so just 1 point here to get the Silver Shroud. This is every single Bladedancer should have at least 1 point into this node right here. Then here, we don't need crit chance or crit vulnerability because Shadow Daggers always crits. And then we have 5 points here just for some 75 critical strike multiplier. Rounding this out, we have 8 points in Death's Door. Again, this is not one-shot protection, the same way that Endurance is one-shot protection. But if we are on low life, it is nice to have this extra source of damage mitigation here. So for the skills themselves, as we start poking through these characters, I'm going to remind you that when we look at things like Sync Strike, oftentimes we see people putting points into maybe attack speed, or more putting points into Shadows deal increased damage. And as far as I can tell, Shadows deal increased damage does not apply to the damage of Shadow Daggers themselves. So if you're building like a well-rounded character, if you're building something that's going to deal good single target damage for maybe killing some kind of boss or pushing corruption or something, then you would want maybe throwing speed, and then maybe also nodes that look like this damage from the shadows themselves. So for us, I was building this character explicitly to run in circles in order to do the arena race for the weekend. So I did not worry about anything other than Shadow Daggers themselves. So I trimmed some points out of nodes like this foreshadowing, and put more points into like Armor Shred, Shadow Daggers, keeping me nice and safe, having extra AoE, things along those lines. So I guess to start things out, we can start with Umbral Blades, our main source of damage. Oftentimes I see people putting things into things like explosive blades so that the blades no longer return to them. So what I would like to do is every once in a while, if I need to throw a if I need to throw a Umbral Blade out, I also don't want those Umbral Blades ever to return to me, because I want the blades to sit on the enemy for as long as possible. So I would like to disable the blades returning to me. On the other hand, if I take explosive blades, then the blades won't be spinning for as long as possible, and I want them to. I didn't want the Umbral Blades to return to me, so I took this node down here instead, this Nightmare Dash. Realistically, there's not many points that I want to take on Umbral Blades, because I'm not throwing them, I'm not using throwing attack speed. I'm only ever proccing the Shadow Daggers off of my shadows with these 2 nodes here, and because of that, I'm using a dagger, because I have to, and then we have like some extra utility nodes over here. Not much else in my Umbral Blades for my playstyle matters. If you were playing Poison, if you're playing like a single target build that uses throwing attack speed, If you want to do explosions, then there's a lot of other stuff you can do. But for me, I was really trying to lean very heavily into just these two nodes, and then also have them never called back to my character by using Nightmare Dash. Next up, we have Shift. Shift kind of ties the room together because it procs pretty much everything here. It procs our shurikens, which will give us some shred and also a bunch of armor. It's going to keep us invulnerable, gives us life restore, mana restore, gives us some haste. Then it drops a shadow behind us. And remember that shadow is going to create an Umbral Blade spinning behind us because of Umbral Remnant. And then on the very bottom right, we have a Shadow Cascade. So let's take a look at Shadow Cascade next. Shadow Cascade, we're pretty much only using it to apply Shadow Daggers. It does do some other stuff for us, like it technically deals some damage. It technically has this armor shred component to it. Maybe it applies frailty on hit. It also gives us some mana restored, which is pretty important for having this entire build work. If we didn't have these nodes over here, then this entire build would run out of mana very, very quickly. So we do need these nodes here. But the most important part of Shadow Dagger, or Shadow Cascade rather, is coming up to the top right and having it turn into a throwing attack, having no melee component, and applying a Shadow Dagger on hit up here. Next up is Shurikens. If you've seen one Shuriken, you've probably seen all the Shurikens, but we are just spec'd over to the right side here with a blade shield spinning around us. We have the pierce nodes here so that they don't get consumed upon hitting an enemy, and then some extra % increased armor for each Shuriken spinning around us. The Fizz Shred is nice. It's nice that it hits enemies and applies all these debuffs, but at the end of the day, these nodes aren't too important. They only really matter if we are running through enemies, or maybe for a single target scenario. Because for me, because I'm not spec'd into single target very much, oftentimes what I find myself doing is just standing on a boss and casting my shurikens over and over, because my shurikens will technically apply things like armor shred or fizz shred, things like that. Last up is Sync Strike, which we kind of already talked about. In a normal build, you would see people speccing into nodes like this. The reason that we are not grabbing Dark Allies up here is that Umbral Blades can only have 3 Umbral Blades spinning at a time. So because we can only have 3, it's not worthwhile to have +2 shadows. This would make our mana much worse. And because of that, we would also need to spec into things like mana efficiency with Synchronized Strike. Maybe we'd use mana efficiency idols, or have it on a chest piece, or have it on a helmet. Or maybe we just have a bunch of mana regeneration. So because we're only relying on Shadow Daggers, we don't need to worry about this Dark Allies node, and we don't worry about Synchronized Strike itself. So this build is pretty narrow-minded in its focus. If you want a more well-rounded character that wants like single target and stuff, you're going to make a few other choices than what I did here. So let's talk about the gear then, the last piece of the equation. So we do have a Wings of Argentus. You could go the route of stacking as much HP as possible, but I wanted to just be as fast as I could and get that damage reduction in. So this is the route that I took for my weekend here. The other kinds of things that you'd expect to see, we also have those. Smoke Weaver, if we could get one thing to have LP on it, I think Smoke Weaver would be like easily the most important. Either prefix that you can get, maybe like a crit multi prefix as a legendary Smoke Weaver, or even just flat physical damage would be excellent for us. Maybe getting frailty or chill or some other kind of suffix, maybe like armor shred on hit, would also be very good. So I think even a 1 LP Smoke Weaver I would have been very happy with. Unfortunately, we have nothing here, so I can show you just real quick what the damage might look like instead. So we can do a quick comparison between Smoke Weaver and a different weapon that happens to have, 2 good prefixes on it. We see that if we look at Umbral Blades and we hover our mouse over this and hold down Alt, we have about 29.9 thousand damage on Shadow Daggers. If we come over here, we flip to a Chris instead with some flat damage into the crit multi. Instead of 29.9, we have 35.7. So the reason that we're using our Smoke Weaver here is not because of the damage that it gives us, but because it gives us a tremendous amount of utility, not only in the flat dodge rating, which is great for us, but also in the cooldown recovery speed for Shift, just allowing us to have a faster playstyle overall and using our damage every 2.2 seconds as opposed to every 2.7 seconds. So I think a Smoke Weaver with LP is your best bet. Unfortunately, we didn't have one of those. Alright, for the rest of the build, you've seen things like Larakas before. The throwing critical strike multiplier from Larakas. Remember, Shadow Daggers count as both throwing and melee, so this is a great source of huge crit multi for our build. We'd like to have hybrid life on this, that would give us another maybe 200, 250 life. So that'd be good, but unfortunately we didn't hit that. For our rings, because we're only focused on running around, we are not putting any throwing damage or throwing attack speed on our rings. So we have a bunch of percent damage, but Shadow Daggers have a 450% increase effectiveness of added damage, so we want as much added damage as possible. So we have rings like this that have a whole bunch of added damage, even though they cause us to take 6% increased fire damage. I think it's worthwhile just to have the big flat damage added to our build. So remember, Shadow Daggers are both melee and throwing damage. So believe it or not, Doom actually increases our damage as well. So Doom is enemies take percent increased melee damage, and that increases the damage of our Shadow Daggers. Honestly, this ring is not insane for us. We would be happy just with like another ring that looks like this, maybe on a gold ring base or a silver ring base, any other kind of base other than minion stuff. We're pretty much just using this ring because it looks so fancy, which it does. It looks very, very fancy. So throwing flat damage, necrotic res, crit avoidance, all the kinds of things that we're looking for. For our helmet and our body armor here, if you're not going for a Wings of Argentus, I think your helmet should be cooldown recovery speed, just to let us use our shift more often, and then Shadow Dagger effect. We do not need synchronized strike mana efficiency, but if you wanted to have 5 shadows spawn instead of just 3, then you would need mana efficiency somewhere. So for us, I think just having these 2 prefixes are a better place. So cooldown recovery speed, Shadow Dagger effect, and as much life as possible. For our chest piece, it would be the same. It would be maybe vitality or dexterity, maybe damage while wielding a dagger, things along those lines. And then the most important would just be as much Shadow Dagger effect on your chest piece as possible, and also as much life on your chest piece as possible. For our idols, which will be the second to last thing we talked about, our idols are just as much Shadow Dagger effect as we can get. We don't need any kind of Sync Strike mana efficiency because we don't need to add extra shadows to Sync Strike. So just as much Shadow Dagger effect as we can. Remember, any Shadow Dagger effect is a more damage multiplier to your build. It's a more damage multiplier after all of like the flat damage and percent increased damage, right? So how did this character do this weekend? It was blisteringly fast to play. It feels bad playing a Shadow Dagger character because I kind of feel like I'm the bad guy. Like I'm supposed to be playing like weird hipster builds and it's like the weekend races. But like, listen, the last time we had one of these races, my character died before we even got to do arena. So I'm glad that I got a second go at it. Like, sure, Shuriken was one of the required skills, and I kind of cheesed the weekend by technically using Shurikens, but realistically, I was just an Umbral Blades character, so I probably wouldn't do this again. And honestly, I'm not sure that I would want this playstyle or like this particular build to be like my main build. So it's fast, it's fun to play, it's like a fun build to play every once in a while, but even after 3 or 4 days of playing, it gets a little old. Just like Sync Strike Shift, Sync Strike Shift, Sync Strike Shift, Sync Strike Shift. It's a little bit strong. It's a little one-dimensional in its gameplay. It's fun every once in a while. I don't think it's something I would want to play for more than just a weekend tournament. If you have a Shadow Dagger build out there that you'd like to talk about, remember you can always drop by Twitch. Twitch.tv/ParryThePig is a good place to talk to me. Otherwise, you can just leave some comments in the comment section of this video here. The only Shadow Dagger videos that I really... The only Shadow Dagger builds that I know about right now are pretty much just this Umbral Blades, right? So people playing Umbral Blades bleed. A lot of people are playing Poison. Some people playing like this as well. I'd kind of like to experiment and go like Umbral Blades Frostbite. I think it'd be just worse than Poison. I wish there were like... What I really wish is that there were like a payoff for converting it to cold, because having a freeze rate and some chill chance, like this is not so good. I wish this node were like more interesting or something, or more enabling. I don't know. Because I want to play Frostbite Umbral Blades, and I almost played it for this weekend, but I figured I've played some questionable builds for the weekend races over the past couple weekends, and I wanted to play something that was like kind of generic, kind of stock standard, just so that I could play with a strong character and see how far I could push in the arena for it. But man, I do like meme builds as well.